A wet, gray dawn. A silent field of tangled hedgerows, strangled by fog. In the summer of 1944, Normandy was not a battlefield. It was a labyrinth. 1,000 miles from home, American soldiers found themselves not on open plains or rolling farmlands, but locked inside a green maze, a place as old as medieval Europe, grown wild with centuries of roots, thorns, and earthen walls. A place the Germans knew would become a killing ground. The hedgerows of Normandy were ancient, living fortifications of soil and stone and tangled vegetation, rising sometimes over 2 meters high, dense enough to swallow a tank, lethal enough to stop a charge, and perfect for defenders who knew how to vanish inside them. Operation Overlord had brought the Allies ashore, but the beach was only the beginning. Ahead lay Cobra, the breakout that would tear open France. This is the story of how that wall of hedgerows became a prison, and how the Allies finally smashed their way out. After D-Day, the Americans expected maneuver warfare. They expected the wide-open battlefields of World War I textbooks. Instead, they found themselves fighting yard by yard, tree by tree, ditch by ditch, every hedgerow its own miniature fortress. The weather turned foul. Rain soaked uniforms, clogged vehicles, and turned foxholes into pits of cold brown water. Artillery churned the earth into a sucking sludge that swallowed boots. The air smelled of wet gunpowder, rotting vegetation, and the unmistakable metallic scent of fear. German observers, hidden in the greenery, watched every movement. Snipers fired from holes no wider than a coin. Machine guns barked from shadowed gaps between roots. Mortars fell without warning, shattering the stillness and spraying mud, bone, and shards of Normandy's ancient earth. The Americans called it the slugfest. The Germans called it the hedge hell. Both sides bled for every field. The 352nd, 2nd Panzer, 17th SS Panzer Grenadier, all battered, all reduced, yet all deadly. These were divisions accustomed to retreating fighting. Even when outnumbered, they could anchor a line with a handful of men and a single MG-42.
A German machine gun nest buried inside a hedgerow was almost invisible. The weapon, when fired, produced a mechanical scream, 1,200 rounds per minute, slicing through leaves, branches, and men with equal ease. American infantry often hit the ground instantly, their faces pressed into the wet soil, hearts pounding as bullets chewed the air inches above them. The hedgerows turned Normandy into 1,000 miniature battlefields, each one isolated, each one uncertain, each one lethal. The American Sherman tank was built for speed and maneuver. But in Normandy, speed vanished. The hedgerows forced them into narrow lanes, predictable kill zones where German anti-tank guns waited like wolves. A tank that crested a hedgerow exposed its vulnerable underbelly. German gunners knew the angles. One well-placed round turned a Sherman into a flaming coffin. Crews described the sensation of moving through Normandy as like driving through a cemetery, knowing any moment they could join the dead. Infantry officers realized that the hedgerow system made everything predictable. You entered a field at one corner. You crossed open ground with no cover. At the far wall, Germans waited. The Germans had spent weeks preparing interlocking fields of fire. Mortars zeroed in on likely routes. Machine guns covered each other's blind spots. Anti-tank guns waited at the perfect angle. Every time the Americans took a single field, it cost blood, sometimes a dozen men, sometimes an entire platoon. Progress was measured not in miles, but in meters. Desperation breeds innovation. It was a sergeant from the 102nd Cavalry, Curtis G. Cullen, who had the idea. Use scrap iron from destroyed German defenses, weld them onto the front of a Sherman, transform the tank into a plow. Tank crews watched with awe and relief when it worked. The cutter ripped open hedgerows, allowing tanks to burst through without exposing their bellies. Suddenly, the Germans were no longer safe behind their ancient walls. The Americans could break the maze.
The invention spread like wildfire. Within days, most tanks in First Army sprouted steel teeth. The Germans noticed and started to fear the tanks again. While the Americans bled in the hedgerows, the British and Canadians attacked the stubborn city of Caen. Montgomery's forces tied down several German armored divisions, including the elite Panzer Lehr. This grinding battle, initially criticized, would prove decisive. German armor that should have been free to maneuver against the Americans was instead pinned near Caen. The German line grew thinner and thinner. Rundstedt and Rommel begged Hitler to allow a withdrawal. Hitler refused. The stage was being set for catastrophe. By mid-July, the weather cleared. The Allies unleashed their air power. Fighter bombers prowled the skies. P-47s dived low, strafing columns with rocket fire and 50 caliber rounds. German troops learned to scatter at the distant whistle of a Thunderbolt engine. Their supply lines shattered. Movement by day became suicidal. Fuel shortages crippled entire battalions. Tanks sat idle, waiting for gasoline that never arrived. Germany was still fighting, but now it was dying. By late July, the American First Army was ready. General Omar Bradley conceived a bold idea: use overwhelming air power to carve a hole in the German line, then pour mechanized forces through it like water through a breach. The operation was named Cobra. If it worked, the Americans would burst out of Normandy. If it failed, Normandy could become another stalemate, a Western Front reborn. On July 25, 1944, the skies over Normandy darkened. First came the vibration, a deep, rolling tremor felt through the earth itself. Then came the bombers. Thousands of American aircraft appeared in a massive, coordinated strike. B-17s and B-24s droned overhead, their engines shaking the hedgerows. Below, the German troops braced for annihilation. The earth exploded. The bombardment was so intense that men felt the air being punched out of their lungs. Trees ripped from the ground. Tanks flipped like toys. Lines of communication dissolved instantly. Entire German companies ceased to exist in seconds. American troops advancing behind the bombardment described scenes of utter devastation: blackened craters, twisted metal, severed branches, and the unrecognizable remains of what had once been a fortified line. Cobra had torn open the German defenses. But chaos is rarely neat. Some bombs fell short. American units were hit. Men died in confusion and friendly fire. Still, the breach was open, and through it, the Americans surged.
Once the dust settled, armored divisions surged forward. Shermans moved fast, faster than they had since landing on the beaches. Infantry clung to the tank's rare armor, leaping off the instant fire erupted. The Germans were dazed, disoriented,
deafened by days of bombardment. Command posts disappeared, communications broken, units cut off from each other. Panzer Lehr, once the pride of Hitler's armored forces, was now a hollow shell. The American advance accelerated. German defensive cohesion shattered. Pockets of resistance fought to the last man, but others broke, fleeing south, abandoning heavy weapons, hoping to escape American encirclement. Reports reached German high command. Lines collapsing, enemy armor behind us, troops unable to reform. We cannot hold. The Germans were not simply retreating. They were disintegrating. American columns thundered south toward Coutances. The countryside changed. The hedgerows thinned. Fields grew wider. Movement became easier. German troops, exhausted and surrounded, fell back in disorganized groups. Many marched with hands raised, surrendering at the first sight of American armor. The Wehrmacht wasn't beaten tactically. It was beaten psychologically. Operation Cobra had achieved what months of fighting could not. It broke the German will to hold Normandy. The key objective, Avranches, the gateway to Brittany and the open plains. The Americans seized it with breathtaking speed. Once Avranches fell, the Germans understood. Normandy was lost. American armor poured through the gap. Columns stretched for miles, an unstoppable river of steel driving into France. Panicked messages streamed into Hitler's headquarters. The front was collapsing. Divisions were evaporating. The Allies were breaking free into the open country, where their speed would be deadly. Hitler ordered a counterattack, a mad gamble. He demanded that his remaining armored forces swing west toward Mortain, cut off the American spearhead, and restore the line. It would become known as Operation Lüttich. It would fail.
In early August, German armor lunged toward Mortain. Tigers and Panthers rolled through the mist. Desperate infantry clung to their flanks. For a moment, the Germans achieved surprise. For a moment, they pushed the Americans back. But the fog lifted, and the sky opened. Allied fighter bombers descended like hawks on prey. P-47s tore into German armor with bombs and rockets. Columns that survived the bombardment were met by American infantry and tanks entrenched on high ground. The counterattack broke against the American lines like waves against a cliff. The German army had no strength left for recovery. The breakout continued. With the breakout secure, General George S. Patton's Third Army entered the field. He moved fast. So fast that German commanders were stunned by the speed of the American advance. Within days, Patton's forces were sweeping across Brittany, wheeling east, then south, then north, maneuvering with a ferocity and tempo Germany could not match. The Germans were being outpaced, outflanked, and outgunned simultaneously. The breakout forced German forces into a narrowing corridor near the town of Falaise. The Americans pushed from the west. The British and Canadians pushed from the north. The Poles, fighting with desperate resolve, closed from the east. The Germans were trapped. The Falaise pocket became a scene of unimaginable destruction. Columns of German vehicles tried to escape. Artillery rained down. Bombers pounded the roads. The ground became littered with shattered armor, burnt trucks, and bodies. It was the death blow to the German army in Normandy. After the pocket collapsed, Germany had nothing left to hold northern France. The road to Paris opened. Allied units advanced with breathtaking speed, sometimes 30, 40, even 60 kilometers a day. The Germans were in full retreat. Normandy, once a fortress, was now a graveyard of wrecked armor and abandoned equipment. The breakout had become a rout. The rout became a liberation. But the victory came at a terrifying cost. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers died in the hedgerows. Entire companies were lost clearing a single field. Medics worked tirelessly among the dead and dying. The wounded whispered for water. Artillery echoed through nights filled with smoke and flame. The ground the Allies captured was paid for in blood.
The Normandy breakout accomplished what the Allies had dreamed of: a destroyed German front, open plains for maneuver, a direct path into the heart of France, the collapse of German strategic control in the West. But beyond strategy, beyond maneuvers, beyond battle plans, it marked the moment when the German army, once feared across Europe, proved mortal. Normandy had been a fortress, but the Allies broke it. And from that breach, the end of the war began. Today, Normandy is peaceful. The hedgerows stand quiet, their leaves rustling in gentle summer winds. Fields once drenched in smoke and blood are now farmland again. But if you walk among them, if you listen closely, history whispers from the soil. Every hedgerow is a wall that once hid a soldier. Every field is a place where men fell. Every road is a path over which an army broke free. The Normandy breakout was not simply a victory. It was a transformation, a passage from the tight, suffocating hell of the bocage into the wide open space where liberation could begin. It was where the Allies stopped crawling and started to run. Thanks for watching. We bring you real and true World War II stories that are never heard before. And subscribe for true and unique World War II mystery stories.